Roy came back from his 30-day cure on Rikers Island and introduced me to a peddler who was pushing Mexican H on 103rd and Broadway. During the early part of the war, imports of H were virtually cut off, and the only junk available was prescription M. However, lines of communication reformed, and heroin began coming in from Mexico, where there were poppy fields tended by Chinese. 103rd is a subway stop, a crowded block. This is junk territory. Junk haunts the cafeteria, roams up and down the block, sometimes half crossing Broadway to rest on one of the island benches. A ghost in daylight on a crowded street. You could always find a few junkies sitting in the cafeteria or standing around outside with coat collars turned up, spitting on the sidewalk and looking up and down the street as they waited for the connection. In summer, they sit on the island benches, huddled like so many vultures in their dark suits. The hipster bebop junkies never showed at 103rd Street. The 103rd Street boys were all old-timers. Thin, sallow faces, bitter, twisted mouths, stiff-fingered, stylized gestures. There is a junk gesture that marks the junkie like the limp wrist marks the fag. The hand swings out from the elbow, stiff-fingered, palm up. They were of various nationalities and physical types, but they all looked alike somehow. They all looked like junk. There was Irish, George the Greek, Pentapon Rose, Louis the Bellhop, Eric the Bag, the Beagle, the Sailor, and Joe the Mex. Several of them are dead now, others are doing time. Joe the Mex had a thin face with a long, sharp, twitchy nose and a down-curving, toothless mouth. Joe's face was lined and ravaged, but not old. Things had happened to his face, but Joe was not touched. His eyes were bright and young. There was a gentleness about him, common to many old-time junkies. You could spot Joe blocks away. In the anonymous city crowd, he stood out sharp and clear, as though you were seeing him through binoculars. He was a liar, and like most liars, he was constantly changing his stories, altering time and personnel from one telling to the next. Louis was a shoplifter who had lost what nerve he ever had. He wore long, shabby black overcoats that gave him the look of a furtive buzzard. Thief and junkie stuck out all over him, though he had a hard time making it. I heard that at one time he had been a stool pigeon, but at the time I knew him, he was generally considered right. George the Greek did not like Louis and said he was just a bum. Don't ever invite him to your home. He'll take advantage. He'll go on the nod in front of your family. He's got no class to him. George the Greek was the admitted arbiter of this set. He decided who was right and who was wrong. George prided himself on his integrity. I never beat nobody. George was a 3-time loser. The next time meant life as an habitual criminal. His life narrowed down to the necessity of avoiding any serious involvements. No pushing, no stealing. He worked from time to time on the docks. He was hemmed in on every side, and there was no way for him to go but down. When he couldn't get junk, which was about half the time, he drank and took goopballs. The fag was a brilliantly successful lush worker. His scores were fabulous. He was the man who gets to a lush first, never the man who arrives on the scene when the lush is lying there with his pockets turned inside out. A sleeping lush, known as a flop in the trade, attracts a hierarchy of scavengers. First come the top lush workers like the fag, guided by a special radar. They only want cash, good rings, and watches. Then come the punks who will steal anything. They take the hat, shoes, and belt. Finally, brazen, clumsy thieves will try to pull the lush's overcoat or jacket off him. The fag was always first on a good lush. One time he scored for $1,000 at the 103rd Street station. Often his scores ran into the hundreds. If the lush woke up, he would simper and feel the man's thigh, as though his intentions were sexual. From this angle he got his moniker. He always dressed well, usually in tweed sport coats and gray flannels. A European charm of manner and a slight Scandinavian accent completed his front. No one could have looked less like a lush roller. He always worked alone. The H-caps cost $3 each, and you need at least 3 a day to get by. I was short, so I began working the hole with Roy. We would ride along, each looking out one side of the subway car until one of us spotted a flop, sleeping on a bench. Then we would get off the train. I stood in front of the bench with a newspaper and covered Roy while he went through the lush's pockets. Roy would whisper instructions to me. A little left. Too far. A little back. There. Hold it there. And I would move to keep him covered. Often we were late, and the lush would be lying there with his pockets turned inside out. We also worked on the cars. I would sit down next to the lush and open the newspaper. Roy would reach across my back and go through the lush's pockets. If the lush woke up, he could see that I had both hands on the paper. An average night went more or less like this. We started work about 11 o'clock, getting on the Uptown IRT at Times Square. At 116th, we spotted one and got off, but the flop got up and walked away before we could get near him. The shabby man with a wide, loose mouth accosted Roy and started talking. He was another lush worker. The fag scored again, he said. 2 notes and a wristwatch down at 96th Street. Roy muttered something and looked at his paper. The man went on talking in a loud voice. I had one come up on me. What are you doing with your hand in my pocket, he says. For Christ's sake, don't talk like that, Roy said, and walked away from him. Fucking wrong, bastard. There aren't many lush workers around now. Only the fag, the beagle, and that tramp. They all envy the fag because he makes good scores. If a sucker comes up on him, he pretends to feel his leg like he was a fag. Those tramps at 103rd Street go around saying, goddamn fag, because they can't score. He's no more a fag than I am. Roy paused reflectively. Not as much, in fact. One night we got on the subway at Times Square. A flashily dressed man, weaving slightly, was walking ahead of us. Roy looked him over and said, "That's a good fucking mooch. Let's see where he goes." The mooch got on the IRT, headed for Brooklyn. We waited, standing up in the space between cars, until the mooch appeared to be sleeping. Then we walked into the car, and I sat down beside the mooch, opening the New York Times. The Times was Roy's idea. He said it made me look like a businessman. The car was almost empty, and there we were, wedged up against the mooch with 20 feet of empty seats available. Roy began working over my back. The mooch kept stirring, and once he woke up and looked at me with bleary annoyance. "Let's get off," I said. "No, this is a good mooch. He's sitting on his overcoat, and I can't get into his pocket. When I tell you, fall up against him, and I'll move the coat at the same time." "Now, for Christ's sake, that wasn't near hard enough." "Let's get off," I said. I could feel fear stirring in my stomach. "He's going to wake up." "No, let's go again." "Now, what in hell is wrong with you? Just let yourself flop against him hard." "Roy," I said, "for Christ's sakes, let's get off. He's going to wake up." I started to get up, but Roy held me down. Suddenly he gave me a sharp push, and I fell heavily against the mooch. "Got it that time," Roy said. "The poke?" "No, I got the coat out of the way." The mooch was only half asleep. I expected to jump up and yell at any minute. Finally I heard Roy say, "I got it." "Let's go, then." "No, what I got is a loose roll. He's got a poke somewhere, and I'm going to find it. He's got to have a poke. I'm getting off." "No, wait." I could feel him bumbling across my back so openly that it seemed incredible that the man could go on sleeping. It was the end of the line. Roy stood up. "Cover me," he said. I stood in front of him with the paper, shielding him as much as possible from the other passengers. There were only 3 left, but they were in different ends of the car. Roy went through the man's pockets openly and crudely. "Let's go outside," he said. We went out on the platform. The mooch woke up and put his hand in his pocket. "All right, Jack," he said. "Give me my money." Roy shrugged and turned his hands out, palm up. "What money? What are you talking about?" "You know goddamn well what I'm talking about. You had your hand in my pocket." Roy held his hands out again in a gesture of puzzlement and deprecation. "Oh, what are you talking about? I don't know anything about your money." "I've seen you on this line every night. This is your regular route." He turned and pointed to me. "And there's your partner right there. Now are you going to give me my dough?" "What dough?" "Okay, just stay put. We're taking a ride back to town, and this had better be good." Suddenly the man put both hands in Roy's coat pockets. "You son of a bitch," he yelled. "Give me my dough." Roy hit him in the face and knocked him down. "Why, you," said Roy, dropping abruptly his conciliatory and puzzled manner. "Keep your hands off me." The conductor, seeing a fight in progress, was holding up the train so that no one would fall on the tracks. "Let's cut," I said. We started down the platform. The man got up and ran after us. He threw his arms around Roy, holding on stubbornly. Roy couldn't break loose. He was pretty well winded. "Get this mooch off me!" I hit the man twice in the face. His grip loosened, and he fell to his knees. "Kick his head off," said Roy. I kicked the man in the side and felt a rib snap. The man put his hand to his side. "Help!" he shouted. He did not try to get up. "Let's cut," I said. At the far end of the platform, I heard a police whistle. The man was still lying there on the platform, holding his side and yelling, "Help!" at regular intervals. There was a slight drizzle of rain falling. When I hit the street, I slipped and skidded on the wet sidewalk. We were standing by a closed filling station, looking back at the elevated. "Let's go," I said. "They'll see us. We can't stay here." We started to walk. "There's sure to be an alarm out for us," Roy said. "Keep a lookout for cars. We'll duck in the bushes if any come along. They'll be figuring us to get back on the subway, so the best thing we can do is keep walking." The drizzle continued. Dogs barked at us as we walked. "Remember our story if we get nailed," Roy said. "We fell asleep and woke up at the end of the line. This guy accused us of taking his money. We were scared, so we knocked him down and ran. They'll beat the shit out of us. You have to expect that." "Here comes a car," I said. "Yellow lights, too." We crawled into the bushes at the side of the road and crouched down behind a signboard. The car drove slowly by. We started walking again. I was getting sick, and I wondered if I would get home to the MS I had stashed in my apartment. We finally ran into the BMT line and rode back to Manhattan. My case came to trial in special sessions. I drew a 4-month suspended sentence. After I gave up lush working, I decided to push junk. There isn't much money in it. About all a street peddler addict can expect to do is keep up his habit. But at least when you're pushing, you have a good supply of junk on hand, and that gives a feeling of security. Of course, some people do make money pushing. I knew an Irish pusher who started out capping a 1/16 ounce envelope of H, and 2 years later, when he took a fall and went away for 3 years, he had $30,000 and an apartment building in Brooklyn. If you want to push, the first step is to find a wholesale connection. I did not have a connection, so I formed a partnership with Bill Gaines, who had a pretty fair Italian connection on the Lower East Side. We bought the stuff for $90 per quarter ounce, cut it 1/3 with milk sugar, and put it in 1-grain caps. Bill Gaines came from a good family. As I recall, his father had been a bank president somewhere in Maryland, and he had front. Gaines's routine was stealing overcoats out of restaurants, and he was perfectly adapted to this work. The American upper-middle-class citizen is a composite of negatives. He is largely delineated by what he is not. Gaines went further. He was not merely negative, he was positively invisible, a vague, respectable presence. There is a certain kind of ghost that can only materialize with the aid of a sheet or other piece of cloth to give it outline. Gaines was like that. he materialized in someone else's overcoat. Gaines had a malicious, childlike smile that formed a shocking contrast to his eyes, which were pale blue, lifeless, and old. He smiled, listening down into himself, as if attending to something there that pleased him. Sometimes after a shot he would smile and listen and say slyly, "This stuff is powerful." With the same smile he would report on the deterioration and misfortunes of others. Herman was a beautiful kid when he first came to New York. The trouble is, he lost his looks. Gaines was one of the few junkies who really took a special pleasure in seeing non-users get a habit. Many junk pushers are glad to see a new addict for economic reasons. If you have a commodity, you naturally want customers, provided they are the right kind. But Gaines liked to invite young kids up to his room and give them a shot, usually compounded of old cottons, and then watch the effects, smiling his little smile. Mostly the kids said it was a good kick, and that was all. Just another kick like Nemmy's or Benny's or Lush or Weed. But a few stayed around to get hooked, and Gaines would look at these converts and smile, a prelate of junk. A little later you would hear him say, "Really, so-and-so must realize that I can't carry him any longer." The pledge was no longer being rushed. It was time for him to pay off, and pay off for the rest of his life, waiting on street corners and in cafeterias for the connection, the mediator between man and junk. Gaines was a mere parish priest in the hierarchy of junk. He would speak of the higher-ups in a voice of sepulchral awe. "The connections say,"